Are you ready to make the most of your oil and gas mineral rights? Welcome to the Mineral Rights Podcast. Get the knowledge and resources you need to manage your minerals and royalties. Here is your host, Matt Sands.
Hello and welcome to the Mineral Rights Podcast. I'm your host, Matt Sands, and I'm joined by my co-host, Justin Williams, and we're here to help you make the most of your minerals and royalties. In this episode, we're going to answer your questions. It's January 2026, Justin. Happy New Year. Year's off to a fast start with lots of things going on in the oil and gas world.
Yeah, you said it, Matt. No lack of things to talk about and lots going on with the National Association of Royalty Owners this year. So it'll be a busy one.
It's going to be busy, but it's exciting. And I think a lot of good things coming for royalty owners, lots of different education options. So just a quick plug, if you want to find out more about the National Association of Royalty Owners, if that's a new organization, you haven't heard of them before, go to naro-us.org. It's a great organization. They provide advocacy and education for mineral and royalty owners. So without further ado, Justin, let's dive into this month's questions. We start off with probably the hardest one first here.
You got it, Matt, but it's a common question. And, at the last convention we were at, there were a lot of questions related to Oklahoma and the Oklahoma Corporation Commission when it comes to oil and gas. So it's kind of no surprise to see it. Question here is, what advice do you have for a mineral owner who is not receiving royalty payments from a producer and the producer has not responded to multiple efforts to reach them via mail, email, or phone? The amount of royalty payments probably don't justify hiring an attorney for collection, but there's a matter of principle here. Plus, it's difficult to know just how much is due from past production or what the future holds. So he's trying to get a hold of the situation. He goes on to say that he's also reached out to the Oklahoma Corporation Commission, which, they're really a regulatory body. They're not always really interested in helping mineral owners to collect from operators or interface with operators for mineral owners. So, Matt, this is a common situation I think people find themselves in, not only in Oklahoma, but other places as well.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And I think the first place to start, I guess, Nathan, with your question is, do you have marketable title? And I know you mentioned that there was an estate settlement. Do you have the recorded deed that vests the interest to you? So that would be the first thing. Have you sent that to the producer? That's step one for sure. So I'm assuming you did that given the extensive efforts you've already made to contact them. But if not, that would be the first step would be to email that copy of that deed to them, along with any other documentation they need, and maybe resetting the clock and just asking, hey, I think I'm an owner in this well or these wells. Here's the deed. And please let me know what other information you need to put me in pay status. And sometimes going from that tact may get you a response. And like Justin always says, polite persistence pays. So that's definitely the motto here. But assuming you continue to get, no reaction from them, the thing would be to just double verify that you do have marketable title. And we'll link to in the show notes a couple episodes on what marketable title is. And there's a Oklahoma attorney that we interviewed, Rick Winblad, it can help you if you potentially need legal help. I know you said that the amount of interest or amount of royalties in question maybe doesn't justify an attorney, but perhaps a free consultation from an attorney can be a good place to start and just to see what things you should be doing based on their experience. The other aspect of this is, you mentioned here you don't know how much is due from past production. Assuming that you had ancestors that the producer or past producer had tried to pay but was unsuccessful in paying, some of those royalties could have been escheated to the state. So I would definitely do a quick search on missingmoney.com and find out if there are any royalties that are sitting out there that you need to claim. That could be one additional step in terms of the past royalties that are out there. And then the other thing is with respect to title defects. So it could be that there is a title defect despite the settlement and all those things. And if that's the case, the producer's not obligated to pay you. Now, of course, it would be nice for them to tell you that so you know what to do to get it squared away. But that could be a potential roadblock that is stopping them from paying you and keeping the funds in suspense. So that would be the first question. And then finally, there's Oklahoma Corporation Commission has a royalty owners booklet. And you mentioned that they have not been any help. And I guess that's unfortunate, but not a huge surprise since they don't have jurisdiction over payment of royalties. And so one of the things that the royalty owners booklet on the OCC website mentions, I'll just read this a segment here about payment of proceeds of oil and gas production. It says, quote, payment of proceeds of oil and gas production is covered under the Production Revenue Standards Act, Title 52, OS, Section 570.1. It says, which calls for first payment to be made within 6 months from the date of first sale, and indicates that if not, interest is due. The Production Revenue Standards Act also provides various guidelines for the timely payment of royalties after the initial payment. The Commission has no power or function over royalty proceeds. District Court has jurisdiction. So if it does require that you take legal action, I know that you mentioned that it doesn't sound like there's a lot at stake, and so maybe not financially huge benefit to hire an attorney. But again, if you hire an attorney, unfortunately, that's my default reaction would be, that would be the place to go to get advice and specific steps to take. And if needed, you could pursue a lawsuit in district court in Grady County. I'm not sure how much of that you could do yourself. It's possible that you could initiate an action there without help from an attorney, I suppose. But more than likely, it would be more efficient and effective to hire an attorney to get help with that whole process, because it sounds like there's a chance that it could be remanded to federal court and then you want it back in district court or whatever. And so then this is a whole legal rigmarole that you'd have to navigate, and not, being familiar with that would be difficult without the help from an attorney. So I don't know, Justin, what do you think? And what advice would you give Nathan?
Unfortunately, Matt, I think this is a situation where really, at least talking to an attorney and seeing what their opinion on what needs to happen would be, and what you need to be sure you have on your side. Like you mentioned with the marketable title, that can really, I think, is a lot of times where mineral owners get stuck. If there's something not quite right, the operator has a lot of things to deal with. The divisional readiness has a lot coming in, and they may be prioritizing what is very clear for them versus what seems ambiguous or isn't figured out on your end. So that chat with an attorney, and like we talked about before we hit record, Matt, sometimes it's not just that the attorney knows the legal part of it, but that they know that area. They know the regulatory offices, the judges, how they like to see things, who does what, and they can answer a lot of questions. So this is a situation, Matt, that's becoming more common too. We talk a lot about fractionalization of minerals, and this is kind of the symptom that comes.
Yeah, that's a great point. And what Justin's referring to there is as minerals get subdivided and subdivided again over time, as they're passed down through generations, they get so small that it actually becomes a larger expense to get them transferred into your name through the probate process, or, to deal with these types of situations, than as if they would remain whole and been in a trust that, you have several beneficiaries, or have an LLC that multiple members of that LLC would benefit from it. So that is the side effect, I guess, of getting it split up so much that it gets small, that the royalties are so insignificant, it's almost just better to forget about it, which unfortunately is the other option, is just to say, well, I gave my college try and, I couldn't get it unstuck, and there's only $100 a year in this thing, and it's, a tenth of a net acre or whatever. I'm just going to give it up or whatever, and just leave it until the next producer takes it over, and then maybe try again, or something like that. So I would say, Nathan, that's those are the steps I would take, and hopefully you can get some progress from them. And I guess one other thought is, if you hire an attorney, you could see how much it would cost for them to write a letter to the operator on their letterhead on your behalf. That could just be enough to get it off of that stuck process and get it moving forward, without having to go through the whole lawsuit. So it could be just $100 or a couple $100 for them to, put their signature on a letter that you even write, and say, hey, I need help in sending this letter. Can you redline it and tweak it? And it could be financially beneficial to do something like that. And if that doesn't work, then I guess you could weigh your options beyond that. But that is another option as well.
Yeah, you said it, and that's a great thing to talk about in the consult as well. If that's an option with them, and if they're comfortable with that. All right, Matt, our next question here is from Lisa. Lisa says, hi, Matt, I'm almost done with your course and feeling more comfortable as I read our leases and look at all the material that's piling up regarding oil and gas interest. Still struggling with finding locations and oil and gas activity, and wondering if I can purchase a subscription to a simple website that will do that work for me. I'm looking specifically for a place where I can enter my location, find a map, and then find any wells and their details on the location. I've looked at Mineral Answers, but it might be more than what I need. Any suggestions? We're in Texas and New Mexico. And Matt, this is an area where there's been a lot of things popping up over the last 5 years. And there's some major options. There's been acquisitions in the market now, and there's some market leaders.
Yeah, there's lots of different options as far as mineral management software. I think the key ones that come to mind are SS&C Mineralware, and then Mineral IQ or Energy Link is an Enverus product. That's an extension of the revenue statement platform that they have that has a mapping interface that can show your producing properties on a map. And then if you pay for their advanced plan or the paid plan, you can actually enter non-producing minerals in there as well. So those are a couple options, just disclaimer, past or current sponsors of the show. And so they're good options and can help streamline that process. And then for a free option as well, there's Well Database. You'd have to enter the location each time to find it on a map, but it would allow you to navigate both Texas and New Mexico. And I will say for New Mexico, if you go to the New Mexico GIS website, unfortunately, they don't show the lateral lengths, the laterals, so the well sticks, as they're called. So in other words, where the wellbore goes, they just show the surface location. So it's hard to visualize where those wells are actually going and if they're traveling through your minerals. If you go to Well Database, even the free plan, you can visualize those on a map and it'll actually have those laterals. So for New Mexico, that's a great option to be able to more easily see what wells potentially are going to go through your property. So yeah, I would say those are the way to kind of have a project-based system where you can have your property saved and just open that app and then see what activity is going on. And then both Mineralware and Mineral IQ will give you a notification if there's any activity near your property. So in other words, if there's new wells that are permitted, any drilling that's occurring, those types of things that you don't have to go onto the website every day to see what's going on. It'll just send you an email and then you can go that way. But yeah, thanks, Lisa, for your support and for sending in your question. And she mentions my course and finding information about leases and understanding all of that. With the course, I teach step-by-step how to find your property on a map, as well as the different types of oil and gas interests, how to perform a title search, the important oil and gas types of documents you should have for your minerals and royalties, and more. And so definitely check that out if you want more of a step-by-step roadmap on how to manage your minerals and you're just getting started. And you can find out more at mineralrightspodcast.com/courses.
All right, Matt. So our next one here is from Bill. And Bill says, we own 0.28 acres of land in Wintersville, Ohio, and a cit wants to drill. We're selling our house and the buyer would like the minerals. No lease with the oil company has been signed, so nothing's in stone with royalties. Is 0.28 acres worth holding on to if it's a deal breaker? I'm assuming he means in the sale of the house. So Matt, this is an interesting one, and I think maybe this is a very common way that people kind of get exposed to mineral rights is in the sale of their home. And I'm sure it can be a whole other thing to consider and learn in that moment.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I guess, they'll give you the standard response and I'll give you a couple of different options, Bill. So the first step is to talk to your attorney or at least your realtor, and they can maybe advise on oil and gas or real estate attorney that could help provide advice on language to include in the deed, because that is something very specific that you'll need to have in the deed. If you end up retaining those minerals or reserving them, you'll need to have very specific language in there to make sure that you're achieving what you set out to achieve as far as that goes. But the one thing I would say is if the buyer wants the minerals and the sales price does not factor that in, you should be compensated for the value of the minerals. So that could be either selling it and having an additional aspect to that contract to say, the price of the house without the minerals is X, or the price with the minerals is X plus, $5,000 or whatever the number is. And then the most robust way to get the value of that is to get a high level valuation. So you have an actual independent view of what the price is, and you can use that as the basis for negotiating the price or agreeing the price with the buyer. You could share that results of that valuation with them and say, here's what a petroleum engineer said as far as those minerals are worth, and here's what I want for it. And they could look at that and say, well, no, I'll give you this, and you can use that to go back and forth. And so that way you're not just coming out of left field. They may understand how you're coming up with the value. But then again, another idea is if the buyer hasn't requested that you not lease the minerals before purchasing the house, you could reach out to Ascent or other oil companies in the area and ask if they'd be interested in leasing. And then you could lease the minerals before you sell the house. And then you can get the benefit of the lease bonus payment in addition to the actual sale of the house. And if you retain the minerals, that's one thing. Or if you sold the minerals and you'd have that additional payment, basically. And there is a trade-off between the lease bonus amount and the royalty rate. Now, if you are planning to sell the minerals, obviously you'd be incentivized to get the higher lease bonus. And then, regardless of what the royalty is. But then know that if it's a savvy buyer, they may not be willing to pay as much if you negotiate a lower royalty because you're affecting the value of the minerals going forward or the value of the royalties going forward. But again, I think that if you do decide to retain the minerals, it's important to get help from an attorney that can draft the deed. Or, there's other options you can do is you actually can convey the minerals into an LLC that you own before you sell the house. And that way there's really no question who owns the minerals. You've already conveyed them out of the fee simple ownership into severed mineral interest and into an LLC that you own. So your attorney can advise which option they recommend, which is the easiest and most straightforward, and go from there. So hopefully that helps.
We don't often get follow-ups, Matt, to the questions. As so life goes, people have things to do. But in Bill's case, we did hear back, and Bill said, "Thank you for your response. My ownership has now been determined to be half the rights with the former owner of minerals. Matt, you passed along the calculator, and he was working with that, and they were in conversations with the lawyer. I didn't realize that he had actually found an heir to the former owner and worked with them, and they were willing to share the rights with the landowners. So, Matt, that's a really great to hear that he was actually able to follow through on that information and get it figured out. We don't often get that closed loop on a situation by situation basis, at least.
Yeah. So thanks. I'm glad it was, you're able to resolve it, Bill. And he mentioned that they're since have 4 wells and they're, sounds like he's getting some royalties now. So that's awesome. So congrats.
All right. Our next one here is from Tina. Tina says, what activity is going on in the Eagle Ford Shale area? I've been hearing a lot about hydrogen production. Can the older, low-producing wells still benefit from the technology of horizontal drilling in LaSalle County, Texas? We have one gas well in the county, and they were offered $2,000 to sell the royalties in May. A few years ago, they offered $200. The royalty checks are very slim, she says, maybe $100 to $200 for the whole year, and they split the royalties with another family member.
Yeah, and it sounds like you have opportunity for additional wells to be drilled. If there's only one older gas well, it's probably an old vertical well. But either way, there's pretty regular development. It's a pretty well-defined formation, the Eagle Ford Shale. And so they know the well spacing, they know all of that. It's just a matter of economics as to when they're going to come in potentially and drill in your area, if assuming it's economic to do so. It's, sort of say $50 to $80 gas or oil prices and $3 to $4 gas. So that's the big question. So the Eagle Ford Shale in general, I'll say, is very active. There's several rigs running. And if you know the legal description of your interest, you can use the Texas Railroad Commission website to see what activity specifically is occurring near your minerals. And so you can see, are they drilling horizontal wells in the area? And, is that something that's likely to happen in your lifetime, where they're going to drill some additional wells? And so check out episode 226, where we show you in a YouTube video how to use the Texas Railroad Commission website to find your interest, to find permits nearby, to find the status of wells and all those things. So, I'd say just in general, yes, there's always the opportunity or potential that future drilling could occur if there's your area is prospective for, the Eagle Ford Shale. And again, it just kind of boils down to economics and, how much capital the operator has and, who owns the lease too. So if it's a really small company that's not in the business of drilling horizontal wells, it may take longer because that lease would need to get sold to a larger operator that's better capitalized to be able to drill those expensive horizontal wells. So, I think all of that, doing your research on the Railroad Commission websites, what I would recommend, and you can kind of fill in the pieces from that to see what activity is going on and see what the likelihood of additional drilling is. And again, like I mentioned, with Lisa's question, the Mineral Management Basics course that I have actually walks you step by step through all the things, doing title search, doing the Railroad Commission website, figuring out what kind of future potential is for your interest and going from there. So.
Absolutely, man. Like we said before, if you're receiving offers in the mail, then quite often it can be a sign of other companies being interested because they know that there's a higher likelihood maybe of activity happening in that area. So Matt, that's, a good sign, certainly when you're receiving those and worth looking into.
Yeah, one more thing. She mentions hydrogen. I will say, as far as hydrogen production goes, I don't believe there's a whole lot of activity. I don't know that that's necessarily a driver. It really is the natural gas in the Eagle Ford. I know there was a couple of companies that were looking at using wind and solar to convert natural gas into hydrogen. And so this is at the time and during the Biden administration was a big push for that type of quote unquote clean energy sources. It's debatable as to whether that is actually that beneficial, as compared to natural gas. And particularly in the Eagle Ford, they're more focused on sending it to the Gulf Coast, to LNG terminals to send it overseas. That's where the big money is. So good luck.
All right, Matt. Our next one here is from Rose. Rose says, my family owns property in Reeves County, Texas. And while I was looking at the GLO website, I saw a document titled Assignment of Oil and Gas Leases, Stipulation and Cross Conveyance. I saw a section that it states my family's lands cross-convey with other leases. What does this mean? And would it impact our royalty interests? And if so, would it be for better or worse? She goes on to say, thank you for all you do and staying tuned into your next episode. The GLO website, I know, was kind of, it was easy to find and easy to read. It was very user-friendly. And I think it can be a bit confusing because it's not a substitute necessarily for doing the title work, though you may find some information there.
Yeah, that's a great point. And really, the times when the GLO website will have information is when there's state-owned minerals, or if you have the situation where you have the surface owner that gets half of the royalties. So there's a certain type of interest in Texas that's the case. These Relinquishment Act lands. So that's the time when you'll see information in the GLO. Otherwise, you have to go into the county clerk and recorder's website to do the research and figure out what deeds or leases or, stipulations of interest are out there. That's part of a title search. But ultimately, this is a really good question. I realize we have not covered this in an episode, so I'll definitely add it to an upcoming episode where we'll cover this topic specifically. But at a high level, a stipulation of interest and cross conveyance is a document that is used to basically cure title to a tract of land. So there may have been ambiguous language in a past deed, or some uncertainty around exactly who owns what. And so basically, this document gets all the affected parties to agree on how much they own going forward. So it cross conveys the interest to all the different parties, and it'll spell out very specifically what you own in that mineral tract. And oftentimes companies will require this if there is ambiguity when they do the title work and get the title opinion. And if it says, hey, you need to get a stipulation of interest on this tract, there's some ambiguity or some inconsistent language in these deeds. And, to make sure that you're paying the right people, you need to get this recorded before you put them in pay status. And so that'll be something the operator may request or require to put you into pay status on some new wells, is to sign a stipulation of interest. And so that's often where those will come from. But ultimately, that's what it is. Now, as far as if it's good or bad for you, would it be for better or for worse? To your point, it's hard to say without knowing more. It could be that you're actually agreeing to a lower amount than you could have gotten otherwise had you taken legal action to go through a quiet title suit or go something to get that cleared up another way. Obviously, that requires legal intervention and expense and all of those things. So, it's debatable as to whether or not you'd be leaving money on the table. But the good thing I will say going forward is that it clears up the title issues. And then it makes it very clear as to what you own because it's recorded, as far as the specific fraction or percentage of your ownership of those minerals. And then in terms of calculating your decimal interest in those resulting wells that are drilled, it's very simple to do that because you know exactly what your net interest is. Now, again, anything that happens in the future, obviously, is a different story as time goes on. And, if you convey those interests to other people, you still have to run title from that stipulation of interest forward to figure out who owns what, if there's subsequent conveyances in the future. But, that is, I guess, the silver lining to that stipulation of interest and cross conveyance. And it's a very common thing, Justin. I know you've dealt with this as well.
Yeah, you said it, Matt. It's really a way for the operator to make sure that they are paying everybody involved in that certain part of the interest the right amount. And it just helps them to be able to set the amount, know that they're confident in it, and not have a bunch of back and forth lawsuits later, which is really what that division order is doing when they're getting that well up and running. That's their job. And so it is very common. Matt, this is usually a situation when all the parties kind of already agree, or they at least know what it should have been, and maybe it's just a clerical error. This can get complicated if you have family members that don't agree on percentages, because this is dependent on you going out and getting each of the heirs to be able to sign this document and agree with them.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, Matt. Our next one here is from Linda, and this is something we hear all the time. Linda says, I have companies wanting to buy my mineral rights in New Mexico, and I've been told that I should not sell my mineral rights. I also have mineral rights in Texas, but I'm told that it's depleted. I do not believe I would ever sell my mineral rights in Texas because I have a land grant patent, and she's been offered $8,000 for 0.8 acres. Would you sell? So Matt, this is kind of a bunch of things packed into this question here, but we hear a lot. People say, I've been told I should never sell my minerals.
Yeah, and that's advice that is very common, although maybe not super helpful because it depends very much on your specific situation. If you need cash to, for starting a business, to pay medical bills, to, pay off debt, whatever the situation, it may make financial sense to do that now. So I'd say that wasn't super helpful for those types of situations. But I will say, without doing a valuation of your specific tract, it's hard to say what the property's worth and whether $8,000 is a fair offer or not, regardless of whether you want to sell or not. So, it doesn't have to be a super involved valuation. For one tract, you're probably looking at an expense of, say, between $600 to $1,000 to get that done. It's not a very involved process. And that'll give you certainty as to what the property's worth from a net present value standpoint. And if $8,000 is close to that net present value, then maybe it makes sense to sell. Ultimately, though, you will get more if you hold on to the property over the life of those wells that are drilled. And so that is something to consider. And also, if you don't have any mention here of whether they're leased or not. So that's the other thing you could do is if the minerals aren't leased, there's a possibility of wells getting drilled in the near future. First step is to lease. You get a lease bonus. On top of that, you could have royalties once the wells are drilled. And so that's likely to exceed the $8,000 that you'll get from selling that property, assuming in that your case, and if you're talking sort of Southeast New Mexico and the Permian Basin, that offer that you mentioned is $10,000. I assume it's per net mineral acre. You didn't mention if it's net royalty acres or net mineral acres, but 0.8 acres, assuming it's net mineral acres, that's $10,000 per net mineral acre. That's not a bad offer, but then also know that there's usually some caveats in those offer letters. I've seen specifically offers where, they've offered an extremely high number, right? So call it $20,000 an acre, $40,000 per net mineral acre. And then it'll show in there like in italics in small font, assuming your interests are leased at 25% royalty, and if it's leased at a 1/8 royalty, that offer is going to be cut in half immediately because the value is half, right? From a standpoint of the future royalties, 1/8 royalty is 1/2 of a 1/4 royalty or 25% royalty. So that means that the value of the property by default would be worth half of that. So you got to be very careful because there's often these little traps that these blanket purchase offers will have in them that you think that, I'm going to get, $8,000. Well, that $8,000 could be based on a 25% royalty. And if you're leased at 12.5%, you're really only getting $4,000, and you didn't realize that, and then you're stuck selling it for a lot less than you thought. So be very careful before you sign anything. If you do decide to sell, get help from an attorney to review any documents. Spending a couple $100 to do that when you have tens of thousands of dollars potentially on the table is certainly worth that investment. And I offer free consultations as well if you want to talk about it, or if you want to investigate getting a valuation so you can make an informed decision. And so I'll put a link in my in the show notes where you or anyone can book a free consultation if you have questions or need help with what you're dealing with, like selling or getting a valuation done. So good luck, and hopefully it all goes well.
All right, Matt. So our next one here is from David. David says, my sister and I have received through inheritance a relatively small mineral interest. We've been listening to your podcast, trying to understand what they own. As I was listening to your podcast, he was listening to the How to Negotiate an Oil and Gas Lease and was wondering if Matt had an example of a fair pew clause for a lease. And he goes on to say that the issue has arisen during recent negotiations with an operator through their agents for drilling in an area of the Permian Basin in eastern New Mexico. He would greatly appreciate if there's any help. And again, wants kind of a pew clause and wants to know where he could find that, which Matt, is a great question to be asking on his part.
Yeah, it's great. It sounds like you're definitely on the right track as far as negotiating that lease and trying to get fair terms, because most leases that you get the first draft are not favorable to the mineral owner. So it's definitely a good idea to treat that like a business negotiation like you're doing, David. So kudos for that. But one sort of shortcut that I like to use to get some potential language, obviously, first of all, you need to get help from an attorney to get make sure that the language you include is achieving what you want it to. But one way to do that in a little bit more cost-effective way is to look for other leases that have been recorded in the county from large mineral owners. So look for LLCs and mineral funds and some of the bigger companies. If you do if you search for the company names, and if they have a website that says, we're a private equity backed mineral fund, blah, blah, blah. The assumption is that they have some professionals working for them, landmen and attorneys that are reviewing leases and negotiating on behalf of the company. And so if you can steal some of the language, because these are public documents, they're public record, these leases, assuming the full lease has been recorded and not just the memorandum of lease has been recorded. But if you can find copies of those that have language with respect to vertical and horizontal pew clauses, and then another thing that I would say is even more important is a no post-production deduction clause. And so what that would do is help prevent them from deducting a significant amount against your royalties for the processing of the gas. And so that can include things like transportation, marketing, processing, and it can really eat into the gas royalties and even give you negative royalties for the gas, where they're charging you for the royalties on the gas. And then the resulting natural gas liquids have value, and there's benefit to them extracting them out, which you'll get benefit from that, as well as the oil you'll get. But that can eat into your royalties significantly. So that is worth negotiating for if you can as well. But ultimately, once you have drafted those leases, so if you look at that example lease, you can create what's called an exhibit that would be attached to the original lease that has those additional lease provisions that both you and the operator would sign, or the lessee would sign. And then just have your attorney quickly review them to ensure the language makes sense and then achieves what you want it to do. And that can be a little bit more cost effective than having them draft it. So it might be talking like 30 minutes of their time versus a couple hours to draft the full exhibit itself. So it could save you a little bit of money considering that the interests are relatively small, as you mentioned. So hopefully this helps. But Justin, what advice would you give as well?
Yeah, I think looking at the county courthouse is a great place to start with that. And then again, an attorney in that area is going to kind of know what is going on, what is being talked about, what case laws there's been for what's changing. And something we often talk about with this, Matt, is really it's case law driven. There is a case that gets decided about how this should have been handled and how it should have been said. And then, the value of the attorney is he's going to know what those are and he's staying up to date with that. And this is why we have specifically oil and gas attorneys. Yeah,
definitely. That's a great point. So, all right. Well, thank you again for everybody who wrote in their questions. And if you have a question you'd like us to answer, send it to feedback@mineralrightspodcast.com. And we'll catch you in the next episode. Thanks, Justin.
Thanks, Matt.
Thanks so much for listening to the Mineral Rights Podcast with your host, Matt Sands. Don't forget to subscribe and share at mineralrightspodcast.com. The Mineral Rights Podcast should not be construed as investment, legal, or tax advice. All information is believed to be from reliable sources. However, we make no representation as to its completeness or accuracy.